The shuttle's descent through Arelthia's atmosphere felt like falling through liquid sapphire. Captain Rowan Vex pressed his face against the viewport, watching as clouds that shimmered with their own internal light parted to reveal the capital city below. His co-pilot, a perpetually anxious lieutenant named Torres, was muttering something about gravitational anomalies that shouldn't exist according to human physics, but Rowan had stopped listening somewhere around the third impossibility of the morning. "Sir, I'm just saying, their buildings are floating. Actually floating. That's not architectural ambition. That's a middle finger to Newton." Rowan allowed himself a smile. "Add it to the list, Torres. Right after atmosphere tastes like lightning, and their star is the wrong color, but somehow we're not dead." The landing pad materialized beneath them with the unsettling smoothness of Arelthian technology. No jolts, no grinding of metal, just a gentle sigh as if the planet itself had caught them. Rowan stood, adjusting his dress uniform for the 40th time, acutely aware that he was about to represent all of humanity to a species that had been traveling between stars when Earth was still figuring out bronze. The airlock opened, and the air hit him like a physical thing. Sweet, electric, alive in a way that made his lungs feel like they'd been breathing fog his entire life. Ambassador Chen, no relation to any Marcuses, thankfully, was already sweating through his formal robes. "Remember, Captain," Chen wheezed, "no direct eye contact with the Queen until she addresses you. No touching. And for the love of God, if anyone offers you Thalara, decline politely. It's fermented dream essence or some such thing. And the last diplomat who tried it spent 3 days convinced he was a sentient cloud." Noted. Don't drink the weird stuff. Don't stare at royalty. Try not to start a war. Standard Tuesday. The walk to the Royal Hall took them through corridors that seemed to exist in more dimensions than Rowan's brain could comfortably process. Walls curved in directions that shouldn't exist, and the light source remained perpetually elusive. His security detail, 2 Marines who looked significantly less composed than their training suggested, kept bumping into each other as the architecture played tricks on their spatial reasoning. Then the doors opened and thinking became difficult. The Royal Hall stretched before them like a cathedral built by stars. The ceiling arched impossibly high, shot through with veins of light that pulsed in rhythms that might have been heartbeats or might have been music. Hundreds of Arelthians filled the space, their elongated ears creating a sea of elegant points, their skin marked with bioluminescent patterns that shifted with emotion in ways Rowan's briefing had utterly failed to prepare him for. And at the far end, on a throne that seemed grown rather than built, sat Queen Lysara. Rowan forgot about protocol. He forgot about his carefully memorized greeting in formal Arelthian. He might have forgotten his own name for a moment. She was luminous in a way that had nothing to do with her softly glowing markings and everything to do with the way she held herself. Power and grace and something ancient that made him feel like a child playing dress-up. Her ears swept back from her head like wings preparing for flight, longer and more expressive than any of her subjects. Her eyes, when they found him across the impossible distance, were the color of deep space, not black, but full of hidden light. "Try closing your mouth, sir," Torres whispered. "You're representing the species." "Right, species. Mouth. Got it." The ceremony began with ritual words in Arelthian that the translator bud in Rowan's ear struggled to convert. Something about honored guests, the bridge between worlds, the hope of understanding, standard diplomatic poetry. But his attention kept drifting to the small figure beside the Queen's throne. Prince Kale was tiny, even by the standards of Arelthian children. He wore robes that seemed to be made of solidified starlight, and his face held the kind of solemnity that children sometimes adopted when they knew adults were watching. But his eyes were wrong, too intense, too focused, scanning the assembled crowd with an urgency that made Rowan's chest tighten with inexplicable worry. The boy's gaze swept past nobles, past guards, past his own tutors who stood ready to guide him through whatever ceremonial role he was meant to play. Then those eyes locked onto Rowan's, and the world contracted to that single point of connection. The prince's markings flared gold, so bright that several nobles gasped, and Rowan felt something slot into place in his chest, like a key he hadn't known he was carrying had just found its lock. "Oh no," he heard himself whisper. "Sir?" Torres asked, but his voice seemed to come from very far away. The child moved. Not walked, not ran in any normal sense, but launched himself from the dais with the single-minded determination of a missile that had just acquired its target. Ceremonial guards reached for him, tutors called his name in sharp Arelthian, and Queen Lysara rose from her throne, with an expression of pure shock rippling across her features in waves of changing light. None of it mattered. The boy dodged, ducked, and somehow made it through the crowd with the kind of luck that looked suspiciously like destiny. Ambassador Chen made a noise that might have been a prayer or might have been a whimper. The Marines reached for their weapons before remembering that shooting a prince was probably poor diplomacy. And then small hands grabbed Rowan's leg, 4 fingers wrapping around his calf with desperate strength, and a face pressed against his uniform as if trying to crawl inside his ribcage to reach his heart. Rowan dropped to one knee without thinking, his hands coming up to steady the trembling child, and felt the boy's rapid heartbeat against his palms. The hall had gone silent. Every eye was on them, hundreds of alien faces expressing variations of shock, confusion, and something that might have been awe. Queen Lysara approached, her footsteps making no sound, her markings cycling through colors Rowan had no names for. When she reached them, she knelt as well, bringing herself level with her son, with Rowan, with this impossible moment that was rewriting something fundamental about both their worlds. Her eyes met his, and Rowan saw fear there, and wonder, and a question she wasn't sure she wanted answered. "My son has chosen you as his father," she said, her voice carrying through the silent hall with ceremonial weight. "And on our world, that choice is binding." Rowan looked down at the child clinging to him, at the small face now turned up toward his, with an expression of such complete trust that his heart cracked open. Then he looked back at the queen, at this impossibly beautiful woman whose life he'd just accidentally walked into, and managed to find his voice. "I'm going to need someone to explain what that means, preferably before I accidentally agree to something that requires sacrificing a goat or declaring war on Neptune." The queen's lips twitched. Just barely, just for a moment. But it was there, the shadow of a smile in the midst of this cosmic joke they'd both just become the punchline to. "No goats," she said softly, "but you should probably sit down." The ceremonial horns blasted a chord that Rowan's bones interpreted as either profound welcome or imminent apocalypse. He stood in the third row of dignitaries, wedged between a Arelthian trade minister, whose ears kept twitching nervously, and Ambassador Chen, who had given up on looking composed and settled for merely not fainting. "Just observe," Chen had told him that morning. "Smile, nod, and for the love of everything, don't speak unless directly addressed. The choosing ceremony is their most sacred tradition. We're basically living statues." Rowan had nodded, grateful for a simple assignment after 3 days of cultural briefings that had left his brain feeling like overcooked pasta. Watch a kid pick his guardian from among the Arelthian elite. Applaud politely. Return to the embassy. Easy. Prince Kale stood at the center of the hall on a raised platform that glowed with soft amber light. The child's ceremonial robes shifted colors with his breathing, and his small face was set in concentration that seemed far too heavy for someone who probably still believed in monsters under the bed. Around him, arranged in concentric circles like petals of some elaborate flower, stood candidates, generals, scholars, artists, all of Arelthia's finest, all waiting to be chosen. The queen watched from her throne, and Rowan made the mistake of glancing her direction. She was ethereal in the morning light streaming through the impossible windows, her markings tracing patterns of anxiety across her shoulders and neck that even his untrained eye could read. Her ears angled forward, focused entirely on her son, and something in her posture spoke of a mother trying not to interfere with fate while desperately wanting to. "The child will walk the circle," a translator's voice murmured through the hall. "His soul will recognize its guardian. This cannot be forced, cannot be faked. The bond is older than our cities, older than our ships, older perhaps than our world." "No pressure, kid," Rowan muttered. Chen elbowed him. "Statue, you're a statue." Kyle began to walk. His small feet made no sound on the platform as he moved past the first candidate, a decorated general whose chest bore enough medals to stock a museum. The man's markings flared hopefully, but the prince didn't pause. The second candidate, a renowned teacher, knelt to the child's level with a warm smile. Cal looked at her, tilted his head, and kept walking. One by one, he passed them. The tension in the hall grew with each rejection, a collective holding of breath that made the air feel thick. Some candidates' markings dimmed with disappointment. Others maintained careful neutrality. The Queen's hands gripped her armrests, knuckles pale even through her luminous skin. Then Cal stopped. Just stopped, mid-step, his whole body going rigid as if he'd walked into an invisible wall. The crowd leaned forward as one. This was it, the moment of recognition, the sacred bond forming. Rowan found himself genuinely curious about which impressive Arelthian would be chosen to shape their future ruler. The boy's head turned, not toward the candidates arranged around him, but outward, toward the audience, toward the rows of witnesses and dignitaries who were meant to be background scenery to this moment. "Oh no," someone whispered in Arelthian. The translator Bud rendered it with appropriate dread. Cale's eyes swept the crowd with that same intense focus Rowan had noticed before, and he felt a cold prickle run down his spine even before those eyes found him. The prince's markings exploded into gold, so bright that people actually shielded their eyes, and the child's face transformed from solemn concentration to pure, unleashed joy. "Absolutely not," Rowan said to no one in particular. "What's happening?" Chen hissed. "Why is he looking at us? Why is he glowing like a tiny sun?" "I think we should run," Torres suggested from somewhere behind them. "Sir, I really think we should run." But running required functional legs, and Rowan's had apparently decided to cosplay as concrete. He could only watch as Prince Cale jumped off the platform, jumped like this was a playground and not the most important ceremony in Arelthian culture, and started pushing through the crowd with the determination of a small royal battering ram. Guards moved to intercept. The child dodged left with reflexes that seemed physically improbable. A tutor reached for him, and Cale slid right with the grace of water. The Queen was on her feet now, her voice calling something sharp in Arelthian that might have been a command or might have been a question. But the boy was already gone, swallowed by the crowd of very tall aliens, and headed straight for the section of very confused humans. "Move!" Chen said urgently. "Captain, you need to move." "Where exactly would you like me to move to, Ambassador? We're surrounded by several hundred witnesses and at least 36 people with weapons." "Fair point. Try looking invisible." Rowan had never felt less invisible in his life. The crowd parted like he was radioactive, creating a clear path between him and the approaching prince. Cal burst through the final row of dignitaries, his small chest heaving with effort, his markings still blazing that impossible gold. And for just a moment, their eyes met again. The child's expression was desperate, hopeful, terrified, and absolutely certain all at once. Like someone who'd been lost in the dark and had just spotted their lighthouse. "Please don't," Rowan said weakly. Cal crashed into him like a comet hitting atmosphere, small arms wrapping around his leg, face pressing against his uniform with enough force to wrinkle the carefully pressed fabric. The boy was shaking, whether from exertion or emotion, Rowan couldn't tell, and making small sounds that the translator couldn't or wouldn't interpret. Every instinct Rowan had screamed at him to comfort the child. Every regulation he'd ever learned told him to step back, maintain distance, let the Arelthians handle their own protocols. The two impulses warred for maybe half a second before his hands moved of their own accord, one settling on the boy's back, the other cradling his head with a gentleness Rowan didn't know he possessed. The hall erupted in chaos. Voices overlapped in frantic Arelthian, the translator giving up and just providing a general sense of confusion, an unprecedented situation, and what in the 12 moons is happening. But under his hands, Cale's trembling began to ease, the child's breathing slowing to match his own. Rowan knelt. He didn't plan it, didn't think about it, just found himself lowering to the boy's level because standing while the kid clung to him felt wrong. Cal's four-fingered hands immediately grabbed his shoulders, and those luminous eyes stared into his with an intensity that made Rowan feel simultaneously terrified and fiercely protective. Footsteps approached, soft, measured, carrying the weight of royalty and what was probably about to be a very awkward conversation. Rowan looked up to find Queen Lysara standing over them, her expression cycling through more emotions than he could track. Her markings had gone completely white, which his briefing suggested meant either shock or the Arelthian equivalent of system error. She knelt beside them, creating a small triangle of chaos in the center of the ceremonial hall. Her eyes moved from her son to Rowan and back again, and something in her face shifted, hardened, then softened, then settled into resigned acceptance of the universe's apparent sense of humor. "You're human," she said, as if this might be news to him. "Last time I checked, yes. You've been on our world for 3 days. Closer to 4, but who's counting? My son has never seen you before this moment. I'm as confused as you are, Your Majesty. Possibly more confused, definitely more terrified." Her lips twitched despite everything. "He has chosen you, a human, a stranger, an off-worlder who doesn't know our customs, our language, or how to properly hold a child of the royal line." Rowan looked down at Cale, who had pressed his face back against his shoulder and showed absolutely no intention of moving. "To be fair, he seems pretty comfortable with my technique." The Queen's markings flickered, a color his tutor had called amusement mixed with despair. "My son has chosen you as his father, and on our world, Captain Vex, that choice is binding." Somewhere behind them, Ambassador Chen made a sound like a dying computer. Torres was possibly praying. The entire Arelthian court watched in stunned silence. Rowan looked at the child in his arms, at the Queen whose world he'd just accidentally invaded, and said the only thing that came to mind. "Does this mean I have to learn to cook Arelthian food? Because I can barely make toast without setting off alarms." The Queen's laugh was short, sharp, and edged with hysteria. "Captain, we need to talk. Somewhere private. Now." "I'm getting that impression, yes." Kel tightened his grip, his small voice finally breaking through in halting, accented English. "Stay. Papa, stay." And just like that, Rowan's entire life shifted on its axis. The council chamber was smaller than Rowan expected, which somehow made it more intimidating. He sat across a table made of something that looked like crystallized moonlight, watching 7 of Arelthia's highest advisors try not to stare at him like he was a fascinating disaster. Kyle sat in his lap, had refused to be separated, actually, playing with the buttons on Rowan's uniform while occasionally humming a tune that made the walls pulse in response. Queen Lysara sat at the head of the table, her markings cycling through colors that Rowan's crash course in Arelthian emotion suggested meant she was working through several crises at once. To her right sat a man whose chest bore military insignia and whose ears angled back in what was definitely aggression. "This is General Thane," the Queen said, her voice carefully neutral. "Kyle's biological father." "Oh, good," Rowan muttered, because this wasn't awkward enough. Thane's markings flared red. "The human makes jokes while destroying sacred tradition. To be fair, I didn't destroy anything. Your son did the destroying. I was just standing there trying not to cause an interstellar incident." "You dare! General!" Lysara's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Captain Vex did not ask for this. Neither did Cale. Neither did any of us. But it has happened, and now we deal with reality, not wishes." An elderly advisor with ears so long they nearly touched her shoulders cleared her throat. "Perhaps we should explain the choosing to our guest. He appears confused." "Confused is generous," Rowan said. "I'm somewhere between baffled and convinced I'm having a very weird dream." Lysara's markings flickered, that amusement-despair combination again. "The choosing is ancient, Captain. Before our children reach their 5th year, their souls can recognize their true guardian. Not always a parent, sometimes an aunt, a teacher, a warrior who will shape them into who they need to become. It happens perhaps once in a generation," another advisor added. "The bond is absolute. The child's development depends on it. To refuse a choosing is to wound the child's very essence." Rowan felt Cale's small hand close around his finger. "And it's never happened with an off-worlder before." "Never," Thane said flatly, "which suggests malfunction, not destiny." "My son is not malfunctioning," Lysara said, ice forming in her words. "Then explain how a human, a species that has barely left its own star system, could possibly be recognized as guardian to our future ruler." The room fell silent. Cal looked up at Rowan with those luminous eyes and said something in Arelthian that made half the advisors gasp. "What did he say?" Rowan asked. Lysara's markings went pale. He said you smell like home. I smell like 3 days of diplomatic stress and bad embassy coffee, but sure, let's call it home. Captain Vex, the elderly advisor leaned forward. Do you understand what acceptance would mean? You would need to remain on Arelthia, learn our ways, our language, our philosophy. You would help raise the heir to our throne. Your life as you knew it would end. And if I refuse, the silence was answer enough. Kale's hand tightened on his finger, the boy's markings dimming from gold to a sickly gray that made Rowan's chest hurt. The child would survive, Lysara said quietly, but something in him would break. We've seen it before. When distance or death separates a chosen pair, the child becomes hollow, functional, but empty. That's not emotional blackmail at all, Rowan said, but his voice lacked bite. He looked down at Kale, who stared back with an expression of trust so complete it felt like drowning. Can I ask a stupid question? I suspect we're past worrying about stupid questions, Lysara said. Why me? I mean, specifically, what does his soul or whatever see in me that it doesn't see in literally any qualified Arelthian? The elderly advisor smiled for the first time. If we knew that, Captain, the choosing would not be mysterious. It would be a checklist. Helpful, very helpful. I can tell you what I observe, Lysara said, her eyes fixed on her son. Kale has been withdrawn since his father and I separated. Quiet, obedient. Too obedient for a child his age. His tutors worried. I worried. He performed every duty correctly but without joy. And then he saw you, the advisor continued, and became a child again. Spontaneous, certain, alive. Rowan felt something twist in his chest. I don't know how to raise a human kid, let alone an alien prince who's apparently going to rule a planet someday. None of us knew how to raise children before we did it, Lysara said. The difference is you would have an entire palace of tutors, advisors, and one very determined mother to help. And me to oppose, Thane added. I will not simply accept. Your opposition is noted, General, Lysara said, her markings flashing with authority. It is also irrelevant. Kale has chosen. We do not override the choosing. Ever. Thane's markings burned with anger, but he said nothing more. Rowan looked at the faces around the table, some hopeful, some skeptical, some simply waiting to see what the strange human would do. Then he looked at Lysara, who watched him with an expression that was part challenge, part plea, and part something he couldn't quite name. If I agree, he said slowly, I have conditions. You're not exactly in a position to negotiate, Thane growled. Actually, I think I am. You need me more than I need you. Earth has dozens of qualified diplomats. Kyle apparently only has one qualified father, and he's currently sitting in my lap trying to braid my hair. Lysara's markings flickered with surprised respect. Name your conditions. 1. I need a translator better than the one I've got. If I'm going to parent, I need to understand what he's saying without a 2-second delay. Easily arranged. 2. I need someone to explain your culture who doesn't get offended when I ask stupid questions, because I'm going to ask a lot of stupid questions. I will assign you a cultural tutor. Next. 3. If this doesn't work, if I'm terrible at this, or Kyle changes his mind, or the universe decides it made a mistake, I need to know I can leave without destroying him. The room went quiet again. Lysara's markings cycled through complex patterns before settling on something that looked like sadness. The bond once formed does not break cleanly, she said, but I promise you this, if you genuinely try and it becomes clear this is wrong, we will find a way forward that protects Kyle. You have my word as queen and as his mother. Rowan studied her face, looking for deception and finding only exhausted honesty. Kyle tugged on his collar, and when Rowan looked down, the boy smiled. Small, hopeful, and completely unaware he'd just upended multiple lives. I'm going to regret this, Rowan said. Almost certainly, Lysara agreed. When do I start? You already have, the elderly advisor said, gesturing to Kyle, who had abandoned the braiding attempt and simply wrapped his arms around Rowan's neck. Fantastic. Does anyone know if Arelthian children need bedtimes, or eat specific foods, or have allergies I should know about? The advisors looked at each other. Lysara's markings shifted to something that might have been panic. We should probably start with a very long briefing, she said. And possibly strong alcohol, Rowan added. We have that fermented dream essence, an advisor offered helpfully. Absolutely not. Regular alcohol. The kind that doesn't make me think I'm a cloud. Kyle laughed against his shoulder, and despite everything, the impossible situation, the watching advisors, the angry general, the beautiful queen whose life he'd crashed into, Rowan felt his mouth curve into a genuine smile. All right, kid, he said quietly. Let's figure this out together. The boy's markings flared gold again, bright enough to light the entire chamber, and Rowan knew with absolute certainty that his life had just become infinitely more complicated and possibly, somehow, exactly what he'd been missing. Rowan woke to find a small alien child sitting on his chest, staring at him with the intensity of someone conducting a scientific experiment. Morning, Cal, he croaked, his voice still thick with sleep. Papa sleep funny, Kyle announced in careful English. Face do this. The boy scrunched his features in what Rowan could only assume was an impression of him snoring. That's great. Wonderful. Can Papa have his lungs back? Kyle bounced once, driving the air from Rowan's chest, then scrambled off the bed with a laugh that sounded like chimes in a windstorm. Breakfast. Teacher say we eat, then learn words, then see the gardens. 3 weeks. It had been 3 weeks since Rowan's life had taken a hard left turn into the impossible, and he still wasn't sure if he was adapting or just in shock. The royal quarters they'd given him were larger than his entire apartment back on Earth, filled with furniture that adjusted to his body temperature and walls that changed color based on his mood, which meant they'd been stuck on overwhelmed beige for most of the first week. He stumbled into the bathroom, which had taken him 4 days to figure out, resulting in one incident he'd forbidden anyone from ever mentioning again, and splashed water on his face. The mirror showed a man who looked like he'd aged 5 years in 3 weeks, complete with circles under his eyes and hair that had given up on military regulation. You look terrible, he told his reflection. Papa talking to wall again, Cale called from the other room. It's called a mirror, and I'm collecting my thoughts. Thoughts are in head, not wall. Rowan couldn't argue with that logic. He dressed quickly, opting for the Erelthian clothing his tutors had provided. Soft, adaptable fabric that shifted to accommodate movement and apparently repaired itself, which was good because Cale had already torn 2 of his Earth uniforms during an enthusiastic game of what the boy called chase catch, and what Rowan called attempted murder by running through palace corridors. Cal waited by the door, practically vibrating with energy. His ears twitched in what Rowan had learned meant excitement, and his markings swirled in patterns that cycled between gold and green. All right, let's get food before you explode, Rowan said. They headed to the family dining hall, a smaller, less formal space than the grand hall where Rowan had first arrived. He was still getting used to the palace layout, which seemed to shift when he wasn't looking, though his guide insisted the architecture was perfectly stable, and perhaps his human spatial reasoning needed adjustment. Queen Lysara was already seated, reviewing something on a translucent screen that dissolved when she noticed them. Her ears perked up, and her markings brightened in a way that Rowan had started to recognize as pleasure, though whether at seeing her son or seeing him, he wasn't quite ready to examine. Good morning, she said. Kyle, did you wake your father by sitting on him again? Is effective, Kyle said proudly, climbing into his seat. It's something, Rowan muttered, taking his own chair. The furniture adjusted beneath him, and he tried not to think about how much he was starting to like that. A servant brought food. Rowan had learned not to ask what it was anymore. Just eat it and be grateful when it didn't try to eat him back. One dish still moved slightly, but Cale assured him it was supposed to do that. And honestly, after 3 weeks, moving food was hardly the strangest thing in his life. Your language tutor tells me you're making excellent progress, Lysara said, her Erelthian accented but clear. Your language tutor is a kind liar, Rowan replied in halting Erelthian. Yesterday I tried to say good morning, and apparently told the guard I wanted to marry his boot. Lysara's laugh was bright and genuine, transforming her usually composed features into something that made Rowan forget what he was eating. The tonal shifts are difficult. Even Erelthian children struggle with them. I'm not a child, though. I'm a grown man who's supposed to be helping raise your son, while I can barely communicate beyond mime and hoping for the best. Papa very good at games, Cale interjected, his mouth full of something that glowed faintly. Yesterday we play hide-seek and Papa stuck in cleaning closet for an hour. 20 minutes, Rowan corrected. And I wasn't stuck. I was Strategically waiting. Guard had to open door. The guard was being helpful. Lasara's markings danced with amusement. I heard about that. Also about the incident in the library where you apparently offended 3 scholars by accidentally activating an ancient text in a dead language. In my defense, the book started talking first. I was just trying to make it stop. It's a responsive archive. It was answering your questions. I didn't ask any questions. I sneezed. You sneezed the activation phrase for Volume 12 of the Collected Philosophies of Ancient Tharn. Rowan dropped his fork. You're joking. I never joke about ancient archives. But her markings suggested otherwise. Kyle giggled and the sound pulled both adults' attention. The boy looked between them with an expression that was far too knowing for someone who still occasionally forgot which way his shoes went. Mama laughing more now, Kyle observed, since Papa came. The air in the room shifted. Lasara's markings flickered through several colors before settling on something complex that Rowan's lesson suggested meant multiple emotions at once. She met his eyes across the table, and for a moment the Queen's mask slipped entirely. I am, she said quietly. It's been a long time since this palace felt light. Rowan didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to acknowledge the weight of what she'd just admitted, or the fact that he'd noticed the same thing. How her shoulders seemed less tense during their shared meals. How her formal speeches had gained a warmth they'd apparently lacked before. How she'd started seeking him out for evening conversations that had nothing to do with Kyle and everything to do with simply talking to another adult who treated her like a person instead of an icon. Papa and Mama should do the festival together, Kyle announced, shattering the moment with the subtlety of a meteor strike. The festival is months away, Lasara said quickly. Is tradition, Kyle insisted. Families present together. We are family now. Teachers say so. Your teacher says a lot of things, Rowan managed. Teacher, very smart. Teacher is going to get me in trouble? But Kale just smiled, his markings bright with certainty, and Rowan realized the boy was orchestrating something beyond his years. Children apparently were the same across species, observant, sneaky, and absolutely no regard for adult discomfort. An attendant entered, bowing to Lasara. Your Majesty, the council is ready for the morning session. Lasara's markings dimmed slightly, duty reasserting itself over the brief moment of levity. She stood, smoothing her robes, every inch the Queen again. Captain Vex, Kale has lessons this afternoon with a history tutor. Please try not to let him convince you they're optional. They're not optional? Kale asked hopefully. Not even slightly, Rowan and Lasara said in unison, then caught each other's eyes and smiled. After she left, Kale tugged on Rowan's sleeve. Papa? Yeah, kid? You like Mama? Rowan nearly choked on his water. What kind of question is that? Simple question. You like? Your mother is. She's the Queen. She's impressive and intelligent and way out of my league in approximately 7,000 ways. That not answer. It's the only answer you're getting. Rowan stood, ruffling the boy's hair, which earned him a squawk of protest and a swat from small hands. Come on, troublemaker. Let's get you to your lessons before your teacher decides I'm a bad influence. Papa already bad influence, Kale said cheerfully. Teacher say so yesterday. Of course she did. As they walked through corridors that were slowly becoming familiar, Kale's hand found his, small fingers wrapping around larger ones with easy trust. Rowan looked down at the child who'd chosen him for reasons he still didn't understand, felt the weight of responsibility and affection tangling in his chest, and thought about a queen's laugh and the way her markings brightened when she forgot to be royal. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a simple captain with a straightforward life. Now he was a father to an alien prince, learning a language that made his tongue hurt, and possibly developing feelings for the most complicated woman in the galaxy. Papa thinking loud again, Kyle observed. Yeah, kid, Papa's thinking very loud. Is okay. Mama think loud too. I hear her say your name yesterday when she think no one listening. Rowan decided that some things were better left unexplored, at least until he'd had more coffee, or whatever the Arelthian equivalent was. Possibly that dream essence stuff didn't sound so bad anymore. Race you to the classroom, he said instead. Cal's face lit up, and they took off running, earning disapproving looks from guards and a startled yelp from a servant they nearly collided with. Somewhere behind them, Rowan could have sworn he heard laughter that sounded suspiciously royal, But when he looked back, the corridor was empty. The Festival of Unity came faster than Rowan expected, probably because he'd spent the preceding months learning to conjugate Arelthian verbs, mediating disputes between Kale and his tutors, and trying very hard not to notice how often Queen Lysara found excuses to seek his opinion on matters that had nothing to do with her son. "This is a terrible idea," he told his reflection, adjusting the ceremonial sash that kept trying to strangle him. The formal robes were magnificent, deep blue that shifted to silver in the light, embroidered with patterns that supposedly represented unity between worlds. He looked like someone's fantasy of what a royal consort should wear, which was exactly the problem. "Papa, look fancy!" Kyle burst into the room, his own robes a smaller version of Rowan's. "We match. We do match. That's the part that's terrifying me. Mama say not be scared, is just walking and smiling. Your mama has been doing this her whole life. I've been here 3 months and still can't figure out which fork to use. We not use forks at festival, use hands. That's somehow both better and worse." A knock at the door preceded one of Lysara's attendants. "Captain Vex, Her Majesty requests your presence in the preparation chamber." Rowan's stomach did something complicated. Over the past months, those private moments with Lysara had become the highlights of his days. Conversations that started about Kale and drifted into philosophy, earth customs, Arelthian history, and occasionally comfortable silence that felt more intimate than words. Her markings had started doing things around him that his tutor had carefully avoided explaining, and twice he'd caught her staring at him with an expression that made his carefully maintained professional distance feel like a joke. She waited in a chamber that overlooked the city, where thousands of Arelthians were gathering for the festival. Her robes matched theirs, that same blue-silver shift, and her hair was arranged in an elaborate style that incorporated crystals that caught the light. She turned when he entered, and her markings flared in a pattern he'd learned, meant appreciation mixed with nervousness. "You look terrified," she said. "I am terrified. Your people are going to watch me stand beside you and wonder what cosmic joke put a human in their royal family. They're going to watch a father stand beside his son's mother and see exactly what the universe intended." She crossed to him, adjusting his sash with practiced hands. "You've been here 3 months, Rowan. You've learned our language, adapted to our customs, and made my son happier than I've seen him in years. The people already love you." "The people love that I fell into a fountain last week, trying to avoid stepping on a ceremonial flower bed." Her laugh was warm. "That did endear you to them, yes. You're approachable in a way royalty rarely is. Is that diplomatic speak for clumsy? It's honest speak for human." Her hands lingered on his sash longer than necessary, and when she looked up, her expression had shifted into something that made his breath catch. "May I ask you something personal? You're the queen. You can ask me anything. Do you regret it? Staying here? Accepting the choosing?" Rowan thought about Earth, about the life he'd left behind, the military career, the small apartment, the predictable trajectory of a future that had seemed sufficient until he'd met a small boy with glowing markings and a queen who'd accidentally become the most important person in his world. "Not even for a second," he said quietly. "This is the strangest thing that's ever happened to me, and I wouldn't change it." Her markings brightened, cycling through colors that his tutor had finally reluctantly explained meant affection and something deeper. "Kyle asked me last week when we were going to make it official." "Make what official?" "Us. He's convinced we're already a family unit and finds our human Arelthian reluctance to acknowledge it frustrating." "He's 5. What does he know about family units?" "More than we do, apparently." Lysara's hand moved from his sash to his chest, just over his heart. "He sees clearly what we've been dancing around for months." "Lysara, I know all the reasons this is complicated. You're human, I'm Arelthian. You're technically here as Kale's guardian, and I'm the queen. Any relationship between us would have political implications and require council approval, and probably drive General Thane to an early retirement. Those are pretty substantial complications." "They are. But here's what I know. I haven't felt this alive in years. You make me laugh when I'm supposed to be dignified. You question traditions I've never thought to question. You've given my son back his joy, and me back something I'd forgotten I'd lost. What's that? Hope that partnership doesn't have to mean duty. That family can be chosen, not just inherited. Rowan's hand covered hers on his chest. I'm still learning. I still mess up constantly. Yesterday, I accidentally told the kitchen staff that Kale wanted to eat their ancestors instead of asking for his favorite breakfast. And they found it hilarious. You're allowed to be imperfect, Rowan. You're allowed to be exactly who you are. And who I am is possibly falling for an alien queen while raising her son and learning to navigate a culture I barely understand. Her markings flared brilliant gold, the same color Kale's had shown that first day. Possibly? Definitely. I'm definitely falling. Might have already fallen. The timeline is unclear because I've been in denial for 2 months. She laughed and the sound filled the chamber like music. The festival starts soon. We should go. Is that an answer? It's a postponement. After the festival, we talk, really talk, about what this means. But today we present ourselves as family. Can you do that? Stand beside you and Kale in front of thousands of people and pretend I'm not completely out of my depth while also trying not to think about how much I want to kiss you right now? Sure. Easy. Her markings flickered with surprise and pleasure. Hold that thought for after the festival. They collected Kale from his room, where the boy took one look at them and nodded with satisfaction. Finally, Papa and Mama stopped being silly. We're not being silly, Lysera said. Or very silly. Everyone see but you two. Since when did you become wise beyond your years? Rowan asked. Since always. Now we go do festival. I hungry and they have good food. The walk to the public platform was surreal. Palace guards fell in around them, not keeping distance anymore, but flanking them as family. Servants smiled with genuine warmth instead of professional courtesy. Even General Thane, standing at attention near the entrance, gave Rowan a nod that might have been respect or might have been resignation to the inevitable. The crowd that had gathered was massive, thousands of Arelthians filling the plaza below, their markings creating a sea of shifting light. When they stepped onto the platform, a roar went up that Rowan felt in his bones. Lysera took her place at the center. Kyle moved to her right, his small hand reaching back for Rowan. And Rowan, after months of feeling like an intruder in a world not his own, stepped forward to the boy's other side and felt something click into place. The queen began speaking in formal Arelthian, her voice amplified across the plaza. Rowan's translation implant rendered it clearly. Words about unity, about family in all its forms, about the bonds that transcend origin or expectation. She spoke about change as growth, about accepting gifts the universe provides even when they come in unexpected packages. Then she switched to English, her accent careful but clear. 3 months ago, my son chose his guardian. He chose a stranger, a human, someone who had no reason to stay and every reason to run. Captain Rowan Vex could have refused. He could have returned to Earth in his former life. She looked at him, and her markings blazed with emotion she wasn't hiding anymore. Instead, he stayed. He learned. He stumbled and laughed at himself and got back up. He gave my son a father and gave me... She paused and the crowd held its breath. He gave me hope that family is not about bloodlines or tradition. It's about choice, about staying when leaving would be easier, about loving imperfectly but completely. The crowd erupted, their markings creating waves of color that swept across the plaza. Kyle squeezed Rowan's hand, his face bright with joy, and Lysera, queen of an entire world, smiled at him with such open affection that Rowan forgot about the thousands watching. Well, he murmured, I guess we're official now. I guess we are, she said. Kale tugged both their hands. Now we eat? Festival have good food. The ceremony continued with traditional presentations, displays of art, performances of ancient songs, offerings of crafted goods. But Rowan barely registered any of it. He stood between the boy who'd chosen him and the woman who'd become home, feeling the weight and wonder of belonging somewhere he'd never expected to fit. Later, after the formalities ended and they'd returned to the palace, after Kale had fallen asleep against Rowan's shoulder during the walk back, after they tucked him into bed with his favorite glowing toy, Lysera took Rowan's hand and led him to a balcony overlooking the city. 3 months ago, she said, my life was duty and responsibility and carefully maintained control. And now? Now it's chaotic and unpredictable and full of a human who can't use forks properly. I'm getting better with the forks. She turned to face him fully, her hands coming up to frame his face. Now it's everything I didn't know I needed. When she kissed him, her markings flared so bright he could see them through closed eyelids. And Rowan thought about cosmic jokes and impossible choices and small boys with wisdom beyond their years. He thought about running toward things instead of away, about families built rather than inherited, about belonging to a place you'd never imagined existed. "So," he said when they finally broke apart, "does this mean I have to learn the royal protocols for courting a queen?" "Absolutely. There are at least 73 forms you'll need to fill out." "You're joking." Her markings danced with mischief. "I am. There's only one requirement." "What's that?" "Don't ever stop being exactly who you are." From inside, they heard Kale's sleepy voice calling for water. Lysara laughed, and Rowan felt his heart expand with the simple rightness of it all. The ordinary moments mixed with the extraordinary, the human captain and the alien queen and the boy who'd brought them together. "I'll get it," Rowan said. "You get enough royal duties without adding nighttime water service." "We'll both go," she said, taking his hand. "That's what family does." And as they walked back inside together, Rowan knew with absolute certainty that every choice that had led him here, every strange twist, every impossible moment, had been leading exactly where it was supposed to. Home had never been a place. It had always been the people you chose to stand beside, no matter how many star systems separated your origins.